On the phone, we have one of the greatest wide receivers in NFL history, a man who needs no introduction, Pro Football Hall of Famer Paul Warfield. How you doing, Mr. Warfield?
I'm doing fine, and it's very nice to be on your program again.
I know you're from Ohio. Was Woody Hayes the only coach that was recruiting you out of high school, or was it basically, I'm from Ohio and I'm going to play for Woody?
Well, I was recruited on a national scale as a youngster coming out of Warren, Ohio. And, of course, in the state of Ohio, Ohio State is, as far as pursuing football interests, perhaps the school and in the state, but there are a number of other very fine colleges, at least 2 to 3, and I might be mistaken on that number. It could be even more, like Ohio University, Bowling Green State University. They're a part of the Mid-American Conference. But as a youngster coming out of high school, as far as I was concerned, Ohio State was what I was looking for.
And I'll assume that Paul Warfield is what Ohio State was looking for as well.
Well, in elaborating on that, yes, the Buckeyes had a tremendous interest in me, but there were a number of other schools in the Big Ten that were vying for my interest, as well as I said, schools from around the country. So, but I pretty much narrowed it down to basically the Big Ten Conference and 2 schools in the conference, University of Iowa, along with Ohio State, that were of great interest to me.
So no interest in Michigan?
Michigan had phoned and had a representative that had talked at least to me via phone, I as well as Michigan State. I probably had a little bit greater interest in Michigan State than the University of Michigan because of a former player I saw play on television by the name of Clarence Peaks, who I believe is deceased now, but it immediately caught my eye, and it was a Saturday afternoon ball game that was nationally televised, and it seemed like Michigan State was a school that generated a tremendous amount of excitement, and so I kind of had an affinity, but when it really boiled down to where I was going to go to school for higher education, Ohio State and Iowa were the 2 schools in the Big Ten, and the 2 schools that were of greatest interest to me.
Now, you were a star running back and defensive back in high school. Going into college, did you know what position you'd be playing? This goes back quite a few years. And interestingly enough, the style of football that was played in those years, high school, collegiately, professional football was a little bit different to some degree, but T formation, run-oriented offenses, very tight, compact offensive philosophy, no wide receivers spread out. As a matter of fact, the position was called end, E-N-D, right, instead of wide receiver in those years. And so it was really part of the old, what one would call smash mouth football tradition. So I was a halfback in answer to your question, yes.
When you were at Ohio State, were you still playing both ways, or was it basically you were just playing on offense?
There was no substitution football in that era in which I played, and it's really kind of interesting because colleges and universities during that period were more interested in the intercollegiate football program being a part of the educational process. And I don't mean to say that demeaning colleges and universities today, but it was a point of focus that there were limited substitution rules, which meant that everyone played, with the exception maybe of 2 players, and usually those players were the quarterback and maybe one other player, when the ball exchanged hands, would leave the field. So everyone had to play both offense and defense. If you were an offensive player, you were automatically a defensive player at the same position, pretty much so. It was a part and was considered part of the educational experience. And the big difference in college football in those days is from conference to conference, you would find run-oriented teams on the professional ranks. They were running and throwing, and a lot of emphasis on passing. But you would find several different offensive philosophies within a conference or around the conferences. Some teams played what they call T formation football, which you had four backs in the backfield: quarterback, fullback, left and right halfback. That was what was utilized at Ohio State. University of Iowa had an offensive philosophy was called the wing T, in which there would only be two backs lined behind quarterback, and another back called the wing back would be set off to a side right outside the end position, which would be equivalent of a tight end position today. So, and then there was an option football running attack, and so you had all these varied styles of play. But today, when one looks at college football, it resembles the professionals exclusively for the most part, with the exception of maybe one adaptation or two. But everyone in college football is throwing the football as what they do in the NFL. In those days, it was quite the opposite.
I would assume that playing both ways, playing offense helped you defensively, and playing defense would help you offensively in getting a better grasp of what the other side of the ball is trying to do.
Well, I would be in agreement with you with regard to that, certainly. But again, from the collegiate standpoint, it was not necessary that their game looked exactly like the professionals' game. They were more interested in the educational experience of one learning how to really play football, both offensively and defensively, learning how to tackle, learning how to block, learning how to incorporate these skills. It was a part, intercollegiate football was considered to be a part of the educational experience. Now, today, it appears that intercollegiate football is a breeding ground to an extent for the National Football League.
Everyone thinks of Ohio State and Michigan State being the powers in the Big Ten. When you were there, you had Minnesota, which won the national championship.
Well, Minnesota did win a national, title the year before I was eligible to play. In those years, eligibility for freshmen was non-existent. As a freshman student, again, going back to transition and what colleges and universities look for in athletes or student athletes, they felt that coming out of high school in those years, it was the best thing for a student athlete to become comfortable with the transition from high school to college as far as academics were concerned. So in the years that I was in school, from 1960 to 1964, eligibility did not start or athletic eligibility did not start for student athletes until their sophomore year. Freshman athletes were ineligible to play their first year because colleges and universities, major colleges and universities, for example, wanted youngsters to have that experience of the transition of learning to feel a level of confidence in transitioning from high school to college, and so academics were placed ahead of that. Those rules changed somewhere around the mid-50s, in which athletes became eligible for their entire 4 years instead of 3. But yes, what you're saying is, yes, there was an understanding. There was an understanding for me because I was a defensive back and was considered to be a cornerback. As a matter of fact, when the Cleveland Browns first drafted me, they drafted me with the thought that I was going to be a cornerback instead of a wide receiver.
So how did you end up as wide receiver?
Well, thankfully, then head coach Blanton Collier, after seeing me and having me do a few things at the first mini camp as both a defensive back and a wide receiver, changed his mind and said, we're going to make you a wide receiver instead of a defensive back. But originally, I was drafted as a cornerback.
What was it like to play for Woody Hayes?
I'm sorry, you said about Woody Hayes. Would you repeat that, please?
What was Woody Hayes like as a coach?
Well, he's a great football coach, and one of the great football coaches of college football. A man who was very, very insistent that fundamentally Ohio State had sound football teams that were error-prone. Not error-prone, that's the wrong word, I'm sorry. There were teams that were so highly disciplined that they would not make errors in any given situation. Our offensive philosophy as well as defensive philosophy was on the simplistic side, which would tend to allow players to operate at that maximum efficiency and make few errors. He was a disciplinarian, demanded a lot of his players, but certainly all of us revered and respected him because we understood that he would do any and everything for his players and gave us great support as far as academics were concerned. And we all revered the late Coach Hayes.
Going into the NFL draft, did you anticipate being a first-round pick?
I had hoped that I would be drafted as high as possible and as close to the first round. It's kind of an interesting story because I came out during a period in which there were two separate leagues, and the consolidation of the old American Football League and the National Football League had not taken place. So the AFL was a rival of the NFL. And as a matter of fact, going into my senior year, the summer before I returned to Ohio State for my final year of playing football there and final year in school, I was approached by the then Buffalo Bills of the American Football League, and their general manager had spoken to me directly and told me in the summer, before I'd even gone back to school to complete my final season of football at Ohio State, that the Buffalo Bills wanted to draft me, but they were concerned because they wanted to draft me in the first round, and they understood that I was interested in the possibility of playing professional baseball. So they were trying to ascertain as early as the summer that would be 1963, I guess it was, if I were going to play football professionally or baseball, because they did not want to, as I was told, waste a first-round draft choice on me.
And then when you joined the Browns, I mean, Otto Graham had already retired. You had Frank Ryan as your quarterback, and they put you at receiver. But you had a pretty good running back in the backfield in Jim Brown, though, to take some pressure off.
Well, I would only elaborate a little bit more on your comment pretty good. And I know that you're saying that tongue-in-cheek, but he's perhaps the greatest running back who has ever played in the National Football League. But yes, I had that experience of playing with Jim Brown for 2 seasons, my rookie year of '64. Although I didn't play much my second year because of a injury, I still was in all of the meetings and was in his presence, certainly during that '65 season, and then finally was able to play late in the year when we played in the then NFL championship game against the Green Bay Packers.
Now, for a team that didn't throw the ball a lot, the Browns found you 52 times your rookie year, and you led the team in receptions. How easily did it click between you and Frank Ryan?
Well, I think very well, and I was very fortunate to lead the club in receptions. I played alongside on the other side of another receiver by the name of Gary Collins, whom I believe is, and I've said this time and time again, and I'll say it here and now, in my mind, he is the best red zone receiver that I have ever seen, and that includes modern day today, all the way up to today. Phenomenal from the 20-yard line, phenomenal receiver, big receiver, one of the first big receivers. He was 6'4", 225. And inside that red zone area, he was just unbelievable in terms of his capacity to score. And he beat some of the top defensive backs time and time again and guys who were in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And phenomenal receiver. That combined with playing with, pro football's perhaps greatest runner, Jim Brown, it was a great opportunity for me, a young player coming in, to find some area of success, because when you have that kind of supporting cast, people are not paying a great deal of attention to the newly arrived player who came in. Additionally, I want to add that the Cleveland Browns organization, once they made the decision that I was going to be a pass receiver, really did a wonderful thing for me. They asked a former player of theirs who had just retired by the name of Ray Renfro to come in and be my private tutor during the training season for 4 weeks on a daily basis. He worked solely with me. And I benefited from Mr. Renfro's instructions, the late Ray Renfro's instructions, because he gave me all of his experiences. We walked through them step by step. He taught me pattern execution. He gave me his 12 years of experience, and that was a big boost for a first-year player, because as a first-year player, I executed and I thought like an experienced veteran, and having that expertise passed on to me, and it helped me out immensely. So my transition, thanks to the help of the coaching staff of the Browns, certainly working with Frank Ryan, who was a veteran passer who understood philosophically what the Browns offense was about, and my coming in and playing, as I said, with talented other players, helped me to have a smooth transition.
What's hard to believe is that you had 52 receptions your first year, and you never went higher than 50 after that. That was your most receptions in your career for a single season.
Well, kind of interesting, a variety of reasons, perhaps. It's hard to say. But, I played with teams that emphasized running the football for the most part. When you have a Jim Brown in your backfield, certainly you're not going to be throwing the ball all over the lot there. With the kind of ability that he had, and he's going to be the main emphasis of the offensive strategy, and rightfully so. After Jim Brown's departure, Leroy Kelly, who was drafted along with me, became one of the top backs in pro football, along with Gale Sayers, and certainly in the then National Football League. And so the emphasis was still on running the football. And so I guess you would say that whether you look at production from a standpoint as far as I was concerned, I played with the Cleveland Browns, which were a traditionally run-oriented football team during the Jim Brown era, then Leroy Kelly era. And after being traded down to Miami, I played with a Miami Dolphin team that emphasized the run percentage-wise as opposed to the pass even more. So, ability without opportunity sometimes can be measured, as Napoleon said, as of little account.
How surprising was it when the Browns did trade you to the Dolphins?
It was a large surprise. I was in my 6th year of my career with the ball club. Things were going well, and so it was something that was of the unexpected nature when I received that telephone call from the owner, the late Art Modell, that the team had made a decision to trade me for the Miami Dolphins' number 1 pick, which was the 3rd pick overall in the 1970 draft. Disappointed, yes, because I was leaving an organization that was a perennial title contender for certainly the NFL title, and at that time Super Bowl play had emerged, and it was just in his 3rd year, and the Browns were just eliminated from that tournament on those 1968 and 69 teams that I played on by the 2 teams that represented the NFL in the Super Bowl. One was the Baltimore Colts, who were beaten by the Jets, and then also the Minnesota Vikings, who ironically were beaten by the Chiefs, but had we won those ball games, we would have been in the Super Bowl. So I was leaving an established title contending team to go to an expansion team out of the old American Football League that had never won more than 5 games in any season in its 4 years of existence.
Did you know what to expect when you got Don Shula as a head coach?
Well, I was hopeful, and I will use that term that at the time I was traded there first, and Don Shula came along 10 days later, I think, in a surprise move in which he resigned his position at, I don't know if he he certainly tried. It was his decision, certainly, but he was approached by the Miami Dolphins, and as the legend goes, given permission by Baltimore to talk to Miami, and then subsequently signed a contract to coach the Dolphins. But that didn't occur until 10 days after the trade, which I was involved in, that had a connection with the 1970 draft. So once he came on board 10 days later, I began to feel initially a little bit better because I knew of his excellence in the National Football League, and that he was a coach during the Lombardi era who coached Baltimore teams, and they played excellently. And had not Vince Lombardi been in Green Bay, perhaps Don Shula's coached teams in the old Western Conference of the National Football League, would have been perennial winners and representing the National Football League in titles as it was or were. Don Shula got the Baltimore Colts to the 69 Super Bowl game against the Jets. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, and they were upset by Joe Namath and the Jets.
Yeah, well, but that might have hastened his departure from Baltimore. But when Shula got to Miami, he had a quarterback in Bob Greasy. He had a running back in Larry Zonka, and another one in Jim Kick, and then throw in Mercury Morris. So there were some offensive pieces already in place. So he didn't have to start from scratch, and he has Paul Warfield as a wide receiver. That's not a bad way to start.
Well, let's look at it from this perspective. He was going to a team that had never won more than 5 games in any of the 4 years that they had been in existence. They were an expansion team out of the old American Football League. Expansion teams are put together usually with cast-offs or players that are considered to be on the downside of their careers from existing teams. The American Football League was not on par with the National Football League at that point. There were a couple of teams that you might say, but basically as a league, it was considered to be slightly inferior to the National Football League. So the makeup of that entire team, excepting a few individuals that you so mentioned, were basically of caliber of players that weren't considered to be on par with the stronger league or the National Football League. So Don was arriving or coming into a situation in which, yes, there was a nucleus to build the winner, but that whole entire thing had to be built. There was no tradition of winning. An interesting story, which I'll be very brief on. I had no idea in 1969, which is the final year I played for the Browns, when I was going into the training season. The leagues were just starting. The merger wasn't going to take place until the following year, the year I was traded in 1970. I pick up a magazine, a Sports Illustrated magazine, to be specific, before my final training camp, although I don't know it at the time, it was going to be my final training camp with the Cleveland Browns in 1969. And Sports Illustrated, on a yearly basis, did a summary of the state of pro football, looking at teams just before they would go into training camp. And so I'm thumbing through this sector on pro football, and it's got all of the National Football League teams that I'm familiar with. And because I know the following year or several months later, as it would be, this whole thing is going to merge, I'm looking at a sector also that says the AFL. So I'm thumbing through just to see what I can read about the AFL, and I come across, ironically, the Miami Dolphins. And the headline of that sector says, the worst team in pro football. And I'm saying to myself, geez, I don't want to read about that. So I thumb and, read about the Chiefs. I read about who were good, and I read about the Raiders who were good, and the Chargers. But I'm not interested. Little did I know that about 7 to 9 months later, in the new year, when the draft would come on, that I would be with that article entitled "The Worst Team in Pro Football."
I think
So it was not. I mean, Don Shula was undertaking a mountainous challenge going down there. And yeah, you indicated the young players. These were young players who were 2 or 3 years who had not been able to turn that, but yet they were a nucleus for a winning team. You're exactly right from that standpoint.
I think his greatest accomplishment was assembling that offensive line with free agents, no names, with Langer, Little, Kuchenberg, Wayne Moore.
Well, it's a tremendous job that was done by the late Monty Clark, who was on Don's staff. I mean, when you really look at how things came together down there, Monty Clark was my teammate in Cleveland in 1969. He retired and was looking for a coach. That was his first coaching assignment. So Don Shula brings in Monty Clark, who was virtually a rookie coach himself, but highly recommended by the late Blanton Collier, who was a great coach and who was my coach and Monty's coach in Cleveland. And Monty Clark transformed those guys, as you're talking about, Langer, Kuchenberg, and Wayne Moore, and helped develop Larry Little and Norm Evans to make them one of the finest offensive lines in pro football during that era in which Miami was so dominant.
As a wide receiver, did you say to yourself, if they're going to trade me, why don't they trade me to the Chargers, trade me to someplace, trade me to the Raiders, trade me someplace where they're going to throw the ball?
Well, first of all, I didn't want to be traded because I'm a native Ohioan. I grew up in a small town east of Cleveland, about 50 miles. The Cleveland Browns were the team that I supported as a youngster, the team that in my wildest dreams, I never thought I'd be with them, but if I was going to play pro football, that's the team I wanted to be with, and it was one of pro football's elite teams. So, I didn't, even though they were a run-oriented team for the most part, I relished my role, which I could make a contribution here and there. I loved every facet of playing with the Browns. It just so happened that I got traded. Now, in reviewing that and setting the tone for that, players didn't make decisions about where they were going to go in those days as it occurs today. I mean, that was totally out of the window. You couldn't demand, I don't care who you were to a certain extent, that, well, if I'm going to be traded, I'm going to be traded to this team or that team because that team, as far as my interests were concerned, were a passing team. Perhaps I could dream about that or I could wish that, but I had no control over that. So things worked out well in Miami for me. And so I've always said about that trade was, no, I didn't necessarily want to go. No, I didn't know it was coming. But in the final analysis, it turned out to be very well because things changed overnight in Miami with Don Shula's emphasis, his input, and with the willingness of that team, young team, and those young players to want to be better. And we went on to have as great a success as anybody has had in a few short years.
The receiver, or all the cornerbacks that covered, you said the only person who could stop Paul Warfield was the coach, Don Shula.
Well, I sincerely believe this, that football is a team game, and the objective is to have monumental success and to win. And in Miami, we had a tremendous amount of success in a very short period of time. We had that because of the willingness of those players to want to be better, the coming of a great young coach who fulfilled his destiny there, and the fact that it was an organization that, won with a philosophical concept at that point, which was a run-oriented, time-consuming offensive attack that took tremendous amounts of time off the clock, and with a defense that proved itself over and over again to be one of the best defenses during those championship years. So it was a team effort, and we all benefited from it. And all of us, whether you're the high guy on the totem pole or the low guy on the totem pole, everyone was a part of championship play, and we accomplished, certainly in that period of time, short period of time, something that no other team in the history of the game has done up to this year, which is to go through an entire season undefeated, untied, and won a championship. So there are some real pluses, I think, that stand out in all of our minds. And, that's team play is what I learned from scholastic football to intercollegiate football, and certainly in professional football. Play for great teams with great coaches, and you win as a team. Individual accomplishments, although certainly there's something that you can be proud of, basically the real thing you want to do is win championships, and that's the most important thing.
I don't know that I've ever seen a better combination of precise route running and speed than Paul Warfield. What was, and it seemed like you were always open. What was the key to getting open?
Well, the thing that pass receivers, whether you talk about today's game or yesterday's game, I think the ability of pass receivers at breaking point to create separation from themselves and that individual who is defending against them. That is in essence, the one asset that pass receivers must have. You can do it with quickness, you can do it with explosiveness, you can do it with speed, or if you're fortunate to have all of these traits, you can do it with a combination of things. But the ability to separate at that instant when the ball is in the air, to create space between the receiver and the defender, is the pure essence of pass pattern running. Now, from a philosophical standpoint, you can do it with technique included, and there are a number of techniques that I learned from the late Ray Renfro. But again, I must hone in on the fact that the ability at break point, downfield and executing a pattern, to create space between oneself as a receiver and competing against the defender is the key to getting open.
Who was the toughest cornerback you went against?
Well, early in my career, there was a little defender by the name of Brady Keys who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I thought did a pretty good job on me in my early years, and created some problems for me on a Sunday in and Sunday out basis, or whenever we played in that series against the Steelers. And then later in my career, as the defenders began to get bigger, taller, certainly Mel Blount, who later played for the Steelers, 6'4" tall, that's 4 inches taller than I, long wingspan, in terms of arm length, and the ability and the speed to run with me. I mean, very rarely in the early years that I played would you find a defender who might be in that range of between 6 foot 2 inches tall, or as much as 6'4", who would have the foot quickness, the flexible hips that Mel Blount would have. And the same would be true of Mike Haynes, who I faced in my final year or two. He was just coming in as a young cornerback, again, approximately the same size of Mel Blount, height-wise, about 6 foot 3.5, 4 inches tall. The ability to have turn and rotate his hips, and to run with the kind of speed that I, as a receiver, had. So they made it a little bit difficult. But at that point, I was trending down and going out of the league. So fortunately, I didn't have to face them on a game-by-game basis. when I was in my prime.
I'm old enough to remember seeing you play. I don't remember you running as much as it was like gliding along the field. It was just so smooth. It looked almost, I know it wasn't effortless, but it looked so effortless. How did that happen?
Well, that's the uniqueness of my running style. But it may have not appeared that I was exerting a lot of effort, but I was, and it probably aided me in terms of being deceptive in terms of runners trying to identify exactly how fast I might have been going, because it appeared that I was not running as fast. It was more of a long gliding stride instead of, quick acceleration and acceleration to reach people quickly. But that, it's a part of my style and deceptiveness, but, it sort of came with the territory with me. It was natural.
That perfect season, do you think that ever be repeated?
Well, I think everything is possible. Every and anything is possible. And the Patriots of a few years ago nearly did it against the Giants, and it was just maybe one or two plays that kept them from certainly equaling the mark. And I will say equaling the mark. First of all, a lot has been made of when the mark will be broken. It can only be broken in the extent and you have to put a question mark behind that, because teams play 2 more games now. But the feat itself is undefeated, and so we're undefeated, and the next team that perhaps may win 2 more games, they will be undefeated too, so they'll win 2 more games. So it's kind of a mark that you're going to say that the new team that does it well, they're the new and latest undefeated team, but they really don't break that mark. But it was a wonderful season as I recollect about it, and the season that happened primarily because, as I saw, we were not trying to accomplish perfection in that manner.
Speaking of achievements, when you were voted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame and you're up there in Canton, Ohio, giving your speech, what is that experience like?
I think it's certainly an experience in which most of the inductees and my experience was it's something that I never thought would happen as far as I was concerned. I mean, my objective in playing football was to play Sunday in and Sunday out to the very best of my ability, and to have a great experience in doing so and help my team win football games. Thinking about Hall of Fame, you think that the very greatest players who played in the history of this game certainly are deserving of that honor. But you think about people like you mentioned, Otto Graham. I grew up as a youngster in Northeast Ohio, watching Otto Graham's greatness, along with Marion Motley, who played alongside of him in the backfield with Cleveland. The two of them are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But when you think of other great players like Jim Brown, who I had the honor of playing with, or John Unitas, who played and was so brilliant, and I watched that 1958 but championship game against the Colts, in which the 2-minute offense was invented in that particular game. I mean, it was mind-boggling, the events of that game. The first time sudden death was ever played. Maybe it's not akin to the first time that man walked on the moon, but it was territory that had never happened, because football games ended in a tie. Right. So during that period, now it's taken for granted today, but to see the mastery of the Giants or if you're talking about the $1 million backfield with the San Francisco 49ers, Y.A. Tittle, Joe Perry, Hugh McElhaney, and the late John Henry Johnson, great players. I never thought that what I had accomplished in pro football would lead me to be in that special place where the greatest players have ever played. I was overwhelmed, and when one is there being inducted, then certainly all the things come into mind for him, as I think they came in mind for me, about how it happened. And when you think about how it happened, you must take into consideration of the support systems from family, certainly to coaches, to great teammates that you played with, who had been helpful in my being able to occupy or gain a spot in Canton's Pro Football Hall of Fame. And so I think most of us want to acknowledge the great respect that we have for those who helped us achieve or get there, because we simply, in most instances, and I think in trying to explain this to you, at best do it by saying, years ago, I had the privilege of being with Brooks Robinson, the great third baseman of the Baltimore Orioles, who, of course, is in baseball's Hall of Fame. And I said, Brooks, we had a conversation. We happened to have a conversation about the Hall of Fame, and he agreed with me and indicating that he just tried to be the best player that he could be every day that he stepped on a baseball field. And in the final analysis, those who are responsible for selecting us, many of us, to go in those hallowed halls of baseball Hall of Fame and football Hall of Fame and other football and other halls of fame, we allow those who are responsible to make that decision, and we just try for the most part to play up to our expectations and our ability, and we are overwhelmed, I think, that those individuals who said, yes, you belong there with the greats who have played this game.
What I feel bad about is that $500,000 of that backfield can't be there this year, and Y.A. Tittle and Hugh McElhaney, and also the Chuck Bednarks of the world. I mean, because, again, they've been part of the Hall of Fame for so long, they should be there this year, but it's hard to travel for these guys.
Well, that is certainly a sad part, because you'd like for them to be there. I am now in my 70th year, and these gentlemen preceded me, certainly in playing in the National Football League. I remember them. I certainly was a great fan of them. I've had opportunities to be with Chuck Bednarik, who's a veteran of World War II, as a matter of fact, and a hero during World War II. And it's always an honor to be in his presence because of not only what he accomplished, play on the National Football League's fields, but in terms of his service to the country during World War II, during a period in which obviously there were a lot greater things that were at stake in terms of freedoms of individuals, and had our nation along with its allies not been successful during that period of time, and I was just born right around that period of time, things could be vastly different. But whether you're talking about Chuck Bednarik, Hugh McElhaney, who is as fine a runner as this league has ever seen, and I remember him with the San Francisco 49ers and his electrifying running skill. I mean, I was just a youngster, had the pleasure of meeting him, had the pleasure of, in past Hall of Fame sessions, meeting the late great Don Hudson, who, in my opinion, is certainly, at the top of the list, and when you start talking about great receivers, of an era, and the things that he was able to accomplish in his era, and are just incredible. So, I think that there's going to be certainly somewhere in the neighborhood, as I understand, of 125 living members of the Hall of Fame who are going to be there that weekend, 2 weeks from now, and it'll be great for Canton and great for the fan base of people who come back, not only that particular day for the induction ceremonies, but throughout the year, but certainly with so many of them returning. And while, be perhaps unfortunate to a degree that some of the ones that you mentioned won't be there, certainly they're, as far as their bust is concerned in the rotunda.
I just feel bad. I got some bad news that Bob Sinclair picked out the meal for you guys, which it's going to be all raw meat.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to send, if it's going to be steak, back. Or I like my steak well done, so I know how would take a well done steak in preference of the raw meat.
So were you better at baseball than football? Could you have ended up in Cooperstown instead of Canton?
Well, I have no idea about that because, all of my thoughts about baseball ended when I made a decision to sign a contract with the Cleveland Browns. But I'll only say this about baseball. When I was a kid growing up, it was the number one sport for the most part. Football was not. So I had an extensive background in it. I was taught by my uncle, who worked with me considerably. But I got to that point, and I made that decision to go football, and never regretted it. And baseball perhaps could have been a possibility.
You don't want to play for the Indians anyway. Rocky Colavito's crazy.
Well, I was a big fan of Rocky Colavito's, and we were discussing my trade that involved my going to the Miami Dolphins and my recollections of that. What preceded that was Rocky Colavito, which was just, the trade that shook Cleveland in a negative capacity because he was one of the great players of that era in Cleveland, and Cleveland was just really, really tormented by that trade and never forgot it.